we've set a challenge for 2 history teachers from Aylesbury High School in Buckinghamshire. They're on their way to the historic village of Ashwell. The challenge is to create a lesson that investigates how the Black Death affected this village. The ingredients: a church that dates back to the 13th century, which contains medieval graffiti written at the time of the Black Death, and a box containing 3 resources specially chosen by experts. These are the vital components for their lesson. There's also 2 local historians who'll be on hand to offer their assistance. Milkman Peter Greener, who runs the local museum, and Shepherd David Short, a keen local historian.
All places have a history, and all places have an interesting history. It's a matter of finding out what's interesting about it.
But right now, neither teacher knows their destination or the topic.
Hartford, what's at Hartford?
Don't know.
Our 2 teachers are Ian Annett, Head of History, and Ian Ochiltree, an NQT.
I'm not your typical 22, 25-year-old NQT. I've got a lot of different experience behind me. What I do bring is my enthusiasm for my subject. I'm an enthusiastic historian.
For the challenge, Head of History Ian will be coaching NQT Ian.
For this experience, it was always going to be more about Ian and what he could do with that, with those objects. I mean, we work very closely together, and I forget he's an NQT.
Let's hope NQT Ian gets coached well, because by 2 p.m. this afternoon, he needs to be ready to teach.
OK, we've got a church plan.
A series of quotes.
Ashwell Village Museum opened in the 1930s and is full of historic curiosities. Curator Peter Greener has a book which describes a significant incident that happened in Ashwell just before the Black Death.
We have tucked away in a little book here transcripts of the court rolls of the Abbot of Westminster. The Abbot wanted to enclose a field, and the inhabitants of Ashwell were a bit incensed with this, and they pulled down all the fences and everything and did thousands of pounds worth of damage.
Peter, who wrote this? Can you tell us?
Well, it's a book called Stories of History, and it was made especially for teachers, I think.
Right. Okay. But we can trust it from as being.
I think from looking at the other stories, they're transcribed from the actual documents.
Right. Okay. So we can trust it as a.
And these
a
documents are very difficult in the original.
Yeah.
They're all in. I think they're in Latin.
Yeah, that might be quite useful, as I said.
Some of the people who had been quarrelling in this year were to quarrel again, and much more seriously in the next year. Peter Botticello was one. He was the abbot's servant.
In 1349, there was a gap in the series of his court rolls. That might be quite intriguing for the girls to hear, telling them the topic.
We can start with this.
Yeah.
This would be really useful, I think.
Very.
If it's all right with you, we'd like to borrow it for perhaps the afternoon.
Yes.
And promise to get it back to you.
Okay.
In the same condition. Thank you. The book that David gave us was very useful and opened up a whole alternative way of teaching this.
What he gave us was a great court roll source.
Now they've got all the ingredients, and with their Year 7 pupils arriving shortly, it's time to start planning.
They need to know something of what happened in this village, what the Black Death was.
The place has grown up around the leavings of that event. So the graffiti and the court rolls, the place has continued and it's left as those things, and we can interpret them. So I think that's been eminently valuable. That they will now have in their heads. They won't have just an abstract concept of a disease called the Black Death that came to England or swept through Europe in the mid-14th century. They'll have a concrete example of a place that experienced it.
Because they're already on a mystery tour, they don't know why they're here, and the whole task is a bit mysterious to them. I think we should use that idea and focus. Yeah. So I think we should walk them through the village, and
I think everything draws to the church draws you in, doesn't it? So maybe something where you can lead them into the church.
So basically the starter, if you like, is essentially the walk through the village, the understanding of age. We'll stand outside the church, do all the things we did, look at the size of the church.
But you want them on that plague pit, don't you?
And then,
On that plague pit.
Get them on the plague pit.
They've designed a lesson looking at methodology, encouraging the pupils to behave as historians would, questioning the resources and examining the evidence.
The girls were on a mystery tour. They didn't know why they were here either, and they didn't know what they were studying, and I wanted to use that inquisitiveness that they brought with them to focus their attention on the subject. So the first thing I wanted to do was just to walk them through the village and let them shape their own inquiry, to look for clues. So that's your first task, a very simple task. You're on a mystery tour. This is an extension of the mystery. We're not going to tell you yet why you're here and see if you can come up with it. Okay? So would you like to lead the way, Mr. Anna? Yeah. Follow Mr. Anna, see what you can come up. Talk to each other. It's perfectly reasonable to talk to each other. See what you see, but make sure you have your heads up.
So there's something here that you point out. Can you see any evidence on there? What's the house called?
The Guild House.
Okay. Do we know what a guild is?
Look how the ceiling's moving around. It's not. That's clear evidence of how old it is. Did anyone notice the name of this house, by the way? Market House. Pretty important to spot. Keep looking for more clues. Anything else you see?
So we wanted to move away from just a knowledge-based lesson, which, frankly, the girls could read a textbook or could look at a website to get that information, to something methodological about what does it mean to be a historian in this place with that kind of topic. What could you do? What kind of sources could you draw on?
Give me some clues of some of the things that you've seen. Laura.
The people in this village were quite religious because obviously you've got the big church and yeah.
Rachel?
Well, we've kind of discovered that it's kind of quite a Tudor village because it's like really old.
Let's pin you down a little bit, because you're quite right. There are definitely things here that were in the Tudor period. Do we know that this was a Tudor village?
I think one of the lessons we did was about how important the church was in the medieval times. So the fact that it's so big could be something to do with that.
Very good. I'm really impressed, especially the thinking about the church. But I think you've started to think it through. We're in a village. We're going to talk about the medieval period. That gives you a broad sense of historical context. There's a historical event we're going to explore. When you start thinking about what it might be, we'll take it to the church and see if we can start to narrow it down. Okay? Let's go. The church is the centre of the community, and this church in particular, because it's so big in such a small village, tells a story on its own. I think the girls picked up on that very quickly. Let's sit down a bit, because I just want to talk a little bit about... Are you all right sitting on the grass? Yeah. Okay. I want to talk just a little bit about what this sort of church represents. Halfway through the 14th century, about 1348, something happens and it changes this area in quite a marked way, and it's like a big shock. Does anybody know what it might be? What else do you see as you look around? Yes?
You see old graves and things.
Old graves. There's gravestones all around here. There's no gravestones here. Why are there no gravestones here?
Are you going to tell the girls what they're sat on?
Oh.
What you said on?
Because you said it was graves. They used to be buried people and they covered it all up.
You are sitting on a mass grave of people who died in the Black Death. In 1348, plague, the Black Death, came to England. In 1349, the plague came to this village. This, underneath us, is a mass burial pit. So many people died that they had to be buried en masse.
He was able to bring in a sense of the dramatic with them sat on the plague pit, and he loved that moment when he was able to tell them that they were sat on a plague pit. And it's good teaching. He's not got that veneer of a very, very experienced and very cynical teacher who puts on a mask. Ian doesn't do that.
What's the connection between the horseshoe I have in my hand and the Black Death arriving in Ashwell? Nick.
If the horses maybe were carrying something to market, then they'd and then the horses would get the fleas and then maybe pass it on to the humans.
And the thing that's happening, the thing that makes people move from place to place and carry the plague with them, is trading on market. So the horse, it's like the horseshoe is like a symbol of the movement of people that carried the plague. I'm just going to pass you around a picture that just shows us a bit about how people in an earlier age thought of the Black Death. Who do you think the skeleton represents?
Death, and so he's maybe
dying.
Who's the other really important person?
Is it like a monk?
It's a monk, yes. And he's right there at the moment of death as well. Is this proof of anything? Is this proof of what the Black Death was like?
Is it maybe someone's opinion of what it was like? So maybe...
Good, it's a representation and it's got to be. We're going to go inside the church and we're going to look at some different types of evidence. Here last week, but what we do know from some of this is that this is very old. You know, you're familiar with the idea of graffiti. You know what graffiti is about. People have left their mark here. Some of it's religious, some of it's mysterious, some of it's somewhere down there it talks about Arsenal. Somewhere on here, I think, what does it say, Mr. Annett? Something about the
archdeacon is an ass.
The archdeacon is an ass. So this is graffiti, and we're familiar with this. I'm going to show you a very different type of scratchings on the wall, writings on the wall, that tells us something about the Black Death. So come with me into the tower. So here we have actual evidence dating right back to the Black Death of how people wanted to record it. It's written in Latin. Who wrote Latin?
I think, would it be like a monk or something?
Can we appreciate the importance of evidence and types of historical record? Can we teach it in such a way that stops it being sort of crude caricature of dreadful disease and frightened people? I think it's important to bring out shades of grey in these stories.
Ian has asked the students to categorise the Black Death quotes supplied by the Museum of London.
Think about your categories, girls, as you go through, please.
I mean, Giovanni, is that Italian? Yeah.
And that will have set off little fireworks in their head and help them to give them a sense of humanness to this process.
You have a few minutes to read them and talk about them. We asked you to classify and categorise. First of all, let's think about what kind of categories could we use? What kind of groupings could we use for them? Rachel?
Like the consequences of it.
Ooh.
Such as, like, it says, scarcely a tenth of either sex survived. It was God.
So I was happy we were able to use them, but we were able to do it in a way that was a bit different from the classroom, and the girls made good use of those. Does it tell us the whole story? Or is there something left out? Let me just read you something. And this is the stories of the village of Ashwell. And it says, in 1349, there is a gap in the series of its court rolls. And its court rolls are what gives us our understanding of what happened. That's where our history understanding comes from, because that was what was written down for us to understand. So we have lots of evidence here, but something that we might want to know about is missing. So your last activity, last thing we're going to ask you to do is just think for a moment for yourself, what do you want to know? Write down on a post-it note any questions you have. Any really interesting questions here that would be good to hear. Laura.
Carolina's question was, how did the Black Death affect the business? Surely there would be less people to sell things to.
Interesting. Sophie?
How did it eventually stop?
Yeah, good. So most of these we'll pick up in the next lesson.
If you've been inspired to try out teaching outside the box, why not contact your local museum or library? They can often lend you resources or put you in touch with local experts who can offer useful information for your lesson. You can find some web links on the page associated with this programme at teachers.tv.
I've taught the Black Death for years, and I don't think I've ever really truly explored the idea that we don't have voices left from the ordinary people.
Being able to teach in such a beautiful, interesting place on such a good topic has been great fun. I'm grateful for the opportunity.